Hi there, it's the great and glorious Nick Dutch yet again, another one of my tremendously unscripted videos. Today I'm going to talk very briefly about, don't know whether you can see it on camera, Transcendental Magic by Eliphias Levi. That was his pen name, actual name Alphonse Louis Constant. It was the first ever, dare I say it, proper classic occult book which I'd ever read in my entire life, and therefore, I've got a very fond feeling towards the author. I've got very fond feelings towards what he wrote about. But what I want to just mention very quickly is what is good about this book and what is bad about this book. On the bad side, on the negative side, Eliphias Levi writes an awful lot of historical inaccuracies, which to a certain extent discredits him as a historian. There's also some tremendous leaps of reasoning which again creates some issues. For instance, the method which Eliphias Levi uses to explain the supernatural phenomenon is to first and foremost create a hypothetical or theoretical model of the way the supernatural works, and then to apply that as if it was a real knowable phenomenon of the universe to another phenomenon, and thus to call that an argument, and thus to call that proof. Because in linguistic terms, in academic terms, if you've got a theory, you can prove the theory under some grounds, but the proof of the theory in an argument is not the proof of the phenomenon as a scientific fact. So in that respect, Eliphias Levi has actually fallen short, and although that does not completely discredit him, because he was still trying to find out what was happening in the world, it does lessen the credibility of some of his observations and some of his thoughts. So that's something to bear in mind. It's still quite a blinding book and quite interesting. As you go through it, you'll see there's concepts such as the analogy of opposites, which is an explanation of essentially social and psychological dynamics. And that's essentially the most important thing about transcendental magic. It uses mythological, religious, and other ideas to explain the way the world works through creating models or systems based upon the Kabbalah and other models like from Eastern and Western occultism to explain the way that humanity seems to operate, the way that people seems to operate, the way that society seems to operate. In that respect, it is a fascinating book and a fascinating read. Although the language, even after the translation from the French, is still a little arcane, and you may find some aspects of it difficult. It's one of those books that you basically just have to read just to try and understand the history of the evolution of occult thought. With a bit more contemplation, you start to realize that some of the ideas that he's containing in Transcendental Magic are very similar to the ideas in the Freemasons' York Rite, which is a system of initiation you go through apparently after you've gone to Master Mason. There's another 33 odd degrees you've got to go through, which is based upon the mythology of the creation of the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem. And some of the references that are made in Transcendental Magic do relate back to some of those ideas. Alright. My understanding, after having read this book a couple of times, is that Eliphias Levi was, I suppose, trying to create another form of quasi-Freemasonry, but with a supernatural aspect to it, and also based upon intellectual, creative, and spiritual advancement. So that would be understanding the meanings behind the writings in the Bible, the writings in the Quran, and the use of all symbols. Eliphias Levi also says in his writings that part of the reason to study his work is to be able to tell the difference between what he calls the magicians and the sorcerers, namely those who are trying to progress spiritually and basically be decent, and those who are trying to distort any spiritual truth and trying to distort people's minds. So in that respect, he's actually provided a very good service, I would say, to humanity in general, if you can read it and if you can think closely about what he's written. Now, if you were to go and get yourself a copy, which I would recommend, you're going to have to take some of his arguments with a pinch of salt. But on the other hand, you will get the feeling that he did believe quite passionately in what he was writing about. He did believe quite passionately in the views about the world which he had. Some of which was, of course, complete rubbish, because he did believe that meditating on the blazing pentagram symbol could actually change the facial features of a child, of an unborn child in the mother's womb, and that's part of his ideas. So you still have to take what he's saying with a pinch of salt.